I was thinking as Ryan was leading us in prayer this afternoon, 2020 has been an interesting year, we'll say the least. And a lot of times, as maybe human nature is, we like to latch on to the negative and concentrate on that perhaps too much. But in so many ways, 2020 has just been an outstanding year for us at Forest Hill. And I was thinking about that when Ryan was leading us in prayer, some of the things that he said, and just, man, I'm so glad that family is here. And all the other families that placed their membership, the people who have obeyed the gospel this year, we are so glad to have some new obedient children of God in the baptisms that we've had, and some new family to get to know better, and those who have placed membership with us. And we're so grateful to God for all of his blessings, but just thankful for them, especially today. This was a series of sermons I was originally planning to preach on Sunday morning, but then I started thinking, you know what, Sunday afternoon might be the best for this type of sermons, and here's why. Because my target audience, which hopefully will be everybody, but my specific target audience is the parents of young children, or those who will be having children in the near future or maybe in the distant future. And I thought those who have children, a lot of times they sleep through the afternoon service anyway. So this might be the time to be able to give their parents who can actually listen for a whole lesson, the opportunity to listen to this series of sermons. And what this is, we're going to do 3 each week, except for the last Sunday, we're going to do 4. Each Sunday afternoon, we're going to talk about 3 ways that we can help our children defeat Satan. 3 ways that we can help our children defeat Satan. And this is not just for parents, but also for grandparents, anybody who has an influence on children. Here are some very practical ways, I believe, that we can help our young people defeat Satan. And this was actually a lesson that was for Polishing the Pulpit a few years ago, and just wanted to share some of these things with you. You remember when Uzzah, and we talked about this a few months ago, touched the ark and was struck down, and David got upset, and he took the Ark of the Covenant and put it in the house of Obed-Edom. And while that was in his house, the house of Obed-Edom, his blessing continued to be just his house, rather, continued to be blessed by God in ways that it never had been before, and it was noticeable. And so noticeable was it that David went and got it out of his house. And then when David took the Ark of the Covenant, you remember what Obed-Edom did with his family? He lit out after that thing, and he followed it to its final destination, because he knew what having that ark in his house did. And remember, we talked about those 3 things that were within the Ark of the Covenant, that talked about God's discipline and his leadership and his provision and those types of things, and his word and the influence that had in the house of Obed-Edom. And we made the point that those 3 things that were represented in those 3 items in the Ark of the Covenant need to be present in each of our homes as Christians. We need to concentrate on these things. And when you think about a Christian home, it ought to be different. There ought to be something that you just notice is different about that home. And if you can't tell that there's a difference in that home, then there's probably something that needs to be changed within that home. And I'm trying to be nice and say probably something that needs to be changed. What I really mean is something needs to be changed if a Christian's house looks, and I'm not talking about decorations or anything like that, but the things that we do, the things that we say, the things that we find important in the house, it needs to be different than those of the world. And so I want to talk about 3 ways that we can help our children survive the attacks from the devil. And I know that sounds pretty dramatic when I talk about surviving the attacks of the devil, but really that's not dramatic enough, and that's not powerful enough. The devil, we're told by Peter, is walking about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And friends, that's just as true as the fact that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Do you believe that? The Bible tells us that Jesus is the Son of God, and it also tells us that the devil is trying to kill your children and trying to kill your soul. He's after your soul. He's after the soul of your children. He's after the soul of every person on this earth. Now, how can we stop him from getting our children? How can we stop him from getting our children? 3 ways this afternoon. And these are going to be very practical. You can institute them in your own home and do it the way that you see fit, obviously. But maybe some things, and I'll go ahead and tell you right now as I present these, as I did at Polishing the Pulpit those years ago. Some of these I heard when my children were still in the home. Some of these I heard before I even had children, and I paid attention to them, and I implemented some of these things in my home. Others of these things I learned by failure. And some things I wish I would have done in our home. Now our children are growing and grown and are leaving the house. And these are some things that I plan on using with my grandchildren. So I'm not going to tell you which is which was a triumph, which was a tragedy in my home. But Mindy could tell you afterwards. She'll let you know. But 3 things. And so I don't want you to think that I'm standing up here saying, okay, I'm the perfect parent. You just do it the way I did it. That's not the case. It's not the case. And I think every parent in here feels probably the same way I do. When your children leave the home, it wasn't the great successes that I had with my children that I dwelt on and thought about. It was, boy, I wish I would have done this better. I wish I'd have done that better. 3 things this afternoon. Number 1, we can help guard their minds. That's number 1. Write these down. Even if you don't have children, young people that aren't even married yet, write these down. Keep them somewhere to where you'll really be able to implement this in your home. Number 1, guard your children's minds. This is probably Satan's easiest attack, is to try to take over the minds of our children, because it doesn't take much to get people to think like the world. And the mediums that he has, especially in our country and in developed countries, the mediums that he has and can use at his disposal to get into our homes becomes increasingly more all the time. And I'm not going to stand up here and say all television is bad, all social media is bad. We understand those types of things. That's how things that he can use to get onto our homes. But that's one of his easiest ways to get to your children. The music that they listen to, the television that they watch, the things that they hear at school, the things that they hear on the internet and see on the internet, and even church friends. I remember Corinne, when she was really young, she came home and was describing this movie to us. I mean, she was just maybe like 4, describing this movie to us. And I said, "What are you talking about?" It's on the way home from church. And she said, "Oh, The Bride of Chucky." And I said, and she was describing scene after scene after scene. And I said, "When did you see The Bride of Chucky?" She said, "Oh, I didn't. My friend so-and-so was telling us about it." I said, "In Bible class?" She said, "Yeah, before it started." Telling her the scenes of that movie at such a young age. So yes, even church friends. What do we do about that? The message being sent by Satan is this: that our children are their own God, and nothing matters in life except seeking those things that will be self-satisfying. Seeking those things that make you feel good, the things that make you the number 1 person in your life. It's all about you and your pleasure and your self-satisfaction. Yet, studies show that our children are even more influenced by something other than what they see on television, what they hear from friends at school, what they hear from friends at church, what they see on the internet and read on the internet, what they hear on the internet. Studies show that there's one thing that's even more influential upon our children than all of those things combined. And you know what that is? It's the home. And that's not just Mark Reynolds' want-to-be solutions. That was from a study that strengthforthesoul.com did on Search Institute, and they would tell you that the home is the most influential thing on the lives of children. Look with me at Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. And I know you probably knew I would go here at some point in this lesson. And if not this lesson, then the ones in the coming weeks. But Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. This is known as the Shema in the old law. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. There's a word there that we can't just fly over. You shall teach them to your children. That's not what it says. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. That sounds like all day, every day, doesn't it? Let them be a constant reminder. Let them be constantly reminded by you about the God that we serve. And He's the one that comes first in our life. He's the one from whom we get our directives. What can I do? And this is where I told you it's going to be very practical. What are some things we can do? Spiritual music in the car from an early age. Listen to spiritual music. And you can get DVDs all over the place. You can even download them from the internet. Spiritual songs. Harding has some really good CDs out that you can put in the car. And there's other places. Each Little Dewdrop, I think, was one from our kids' childhood. We listened to that thing over and over and over and over and over again to where it came to where I was able to say the books of the Old Testament and the New Testament because of that CD. I have to sing it in my mind, but I can do it. No, in all seriousness, I did. That's where I learned, all the way, Genesis through all the way through Revelation, because of the song that we sang, spiritual music in the car. And use God's word to give advice. Ask your children when they get home from school, or when they get home from a friend's house, or when at the end of the day, what did you do to practice the golden rule today? Questions like that. What did you do to practice the golden rule today? What did you do to help somebody out today? What did you do to show the light of Christ in your life today? And just let them answer. In other words, we're just reminding them of their purpose on this earth, and that purpose is to live for God. Here's another one. Turn to Romans chapter 12. And this might be a 10-part series if I take this long on each point, but I'll move along after this. Look at Romans chapter 12. Make the Bible real to your children. We don't go to Bible school only to learn about the Bible. We don't go to church to see what God says. The Bible is a daily part of a Christian's life. We walk by its precepts every single day. We live the way that we do because the Bible tells me so. So how can I make the Bible real to my children? They're not just Bible stories like Humpty Dumpty or something like that. These people actually lived. These things actually happened. This is exactly what God expects from me as one of His people. Things like this, I think, really, really help a lot. Look at Romans chapter 12, verse 2. We know this verse. This is a verse that's well used because it's so powerful. It says, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Here's what you can do with your children. When you go into bed with them and you, one at a time, or if they share the same room, you might have to use them all in one reading. But sit down with each of them and do it something like this. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. I'm trying to think of somebody's name I can use in this. I've already embarrassed Corinne, so I won't do that again. I'm going to use John Manning. He raised his hand first. Pretend like little Johnny's back to 3 years old. And read it like this. And do not let John be conformed to this world, but let John be transformed by the renewing of his mind, so that John may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. You do that with your children, and boy, that makes that verse come alive, doesn't it? Let me be what this passage teaches me to be. Number 2, help guard our children's minds, number 1. Number 2, institute quiet time. Institute quiet time. And I think, hopefully you know me by now, I'm not one of those that thinks, all this generation is just so much worse than my generation. Matter of fact, there's things about this generation that are so much better than my generation. And I truly believe that. But I think we live in a time where there is constant noise and constant activity. And it feels like if we're not constantly busy, constantly doing something, not constantly engaged by something else to fill our time, then there's something wrong. We can't let children just sit there. We've got to give them something to do. So they institute some quiet time into the lives of our children. Look at Psalm 1:2. Let me just read it to you for time's sake. It says, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he does meditate both day and night." Meditating. Now, it took me many years to understand what the real definition of meditate was. Because my granddad would always say, I'm going to go in here and in the living room, get my recliner and meditate. So I thought meditate was go back and lean back in your recliner and go to sleep for about an hour. Because that's what he called it. That's not meditation. Meditation is taking some time to do nothing else but just think about things. And here, again, is some advice I found someplace else, but I think it's just great. Institute the first sessions of quiet time when your child is very young, maybe even 2. Institute some quiet time. And when you do, let it be short to start out. Attention spans, mine's never gotten much past this, but about 1 minute for a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old is a lot of time. So let it be for a minute or 5 minutes, whatever. You're the parent, you know what to do better than I. But give them something to think about. Son, I want you to go into your room, and for 3 minutes, I just want you to think of what it's going to be like in heaven. Or for 3 minutes, I want you to think about what your role is. How can you help make Forest Hill better? What can you do at your age as a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, whatever it is? What can you do at Forest Hill to help other people? What can you do? Or you can just go back and think for 3 minutes, go in there and think about the days of creation and what that must have been like. Just give them some time to think on the Word of God. And that becomes a habit. That's something that they'll do. That's something when they're sitting there and they're waiting for something for a doctor's appointment or whatever later in life, that they'll know how to just sit back and think about things that will draw them closer to God. What do you think about when you have nothing to think about? We can train our minds in that way. If we do this, experts say, about 4 times a week and keep it at a consistency, so a child will come to expect the quiet time and will eventually look forward to it. Try that with your children and tell me if it's true or not. But I bet it is. Number 3, guard their schedules. Guard their minds, institute quiet time, guard their schedules. Just like adults. Children who are often very busy, who are overscheduled and constantly tired, will find themselves easier prey for the devil. When you're tired, when you're worn out, you find it's easier prey for the devil. The things that are less important are often the things that we just have to do. Isn't that the truth? The things that are the least important are the things we just have to do. And that's not a slam. That's how life is. When I come in the morning, I like to try to get things done first that, number one, are easy so I can scratch them off my to-do list. But also, those are the things that you have to do, not that they're important, they just have to be done. And so much of life is just like that. And so what happens is we spend so much time on the unimportant things that we have to try to squeeze the important things into a smaller space. And we're constantly busy. Each person that is over what your children are involved in thinks that the role that they have with their child is the most important thing for them. Let me tell you what I'm thinking about. You know, playing sports when I was younger, every coach that I had, you remember the rules that first day of practice. Let me tell you, boys, this is how it's going to be. You miss one practice unexcused, you don't play the next game. You miss two practice unexcused, you're done for the year. You're 5 minutes late, 5 minutes early. Or let's see, on time is late, 5 minutes early is on time. You remember those kind of speeches. You got to be there. And that's number one in their life. I remember our not being able to go on spring break with my family because we had a coach. So, no, we've got practice that week. You're not going to do that. Band concert on a Wednesday night. Your child has to be here. If they don't, it's going to be 2 letter grades deducted from their grade. And things like this. And so everything that the other people are over, and it's you can understand it in a way because that's what they're passionate about, or else why would they be doing it? A baseball coach is passionate about baseball, so he wants it to be just as important to you as it is to him. So they make these rules. But here's the fact, baseball's not as important as some other things. Band is not as important as some other things. But what happens is we get so much demand from other people that we spend time doing more unimportant things, and we let them dictate what's the most important thing for our children when it just isn't so. So what do we do? What do we do? What happens to our kids and ourselves when we let the less important things take up most of our time? Those less important things become the most important things. Because that's what we spend most of our time doing. Ever notice this? It's really doesn't have a whole lot to do with this, but I'm going to make a point and hope it sticks. You ever notice in Hollywood how many times the leading man and the leading woman will end up in real life falling in love and leaving their spouses and getting married? You know why that happens? It's because both of them are at work all the time with each other. They're spending more time with each other and less time with their spouses. And guess what happens? The other one becomes more important than what they have at home. That happens not only in that situation, but it happens when we let the less important things take up most of our times. Then in our minds, they become the most important things. So what can we do? And the young adult class is going to see part of what we have coming up in our class the next few weeks. Make a list of the 5 most important things for your family. Make a list of the 5 most important things for your family. And do this together as a family. And your children know, they know just as well as you do what's the most important things or what should be the most important things. And I suggest try it and tell me if I'm wrong, that they'll tell you what the 5 most important things are, and usually their list will match yours. Because children have a spirit about them that is just beautiful to behold. Here's a list. Bible class and worship, count that as 1. Youth activities with the church, school, physical activity, exercise, and then entertainment. And do them in order. And I would say that your children will probably come up with something close to that, but do it together as a family. And as a family, talk about, okay, we know these 5 things we've agreed upon as a family, that these are going to be the most important thing in our homes. And we're going to guard this list, and we're all going to be careful and hold each other accountable that that does not get flip-flopped. So you got that list, and what happens when you do have a band concert on a Wednesday night or a Sunday morning? You go back to the list and you ask yourself, what's the most important thing in our home? See, it's a constant reminder. We know sometimes we just forget. Guard their schedules. Don't let them get so filled up with things that when all is said and done, really do not amount to a hill of beans. Those 3 things this afternoon. Help guard your children's mind. Institute quiet time, meditating time, and then guard their schedules. Keep first things first. In your home, as mothers and fathers, your children are going to come in contact with people all over this world, and with people who have different interests and different goals in their lives than you do. We can just sit back and let them be influenced in ways that are not right, or we can guard them, help them, guide them, protect them, which is really what God commands of us. These are the first 3. We'll talk about another 3, Lord willing, next week. But today, if you have not obeyed the gospel, you want to know what's going to change your home the most? You obeying the gospel. Believing with all your heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, repenting of your sins, confessing your faith in Him, being baptized into Him so your sins will be washed away, and then living for Jesus for the rest of your life until this life is over. But one time you did obey the gospel, but you've not been living as you should. Come home. Mothers and fathers, living a faithful Christian life. You want to see your children in heaven. If you want them to go to heaven, you've got to be the example that you ought to be. If we can help